Good afternoon, Keith Tebow from FRC Media. Thank you for joining us today. You know, we're trying to speak to as many candidates as possible as we head into the September 6th Democratic and Republican primary. My guest today is Chris Dempsey. He's a Democrat running for auditor. He'll be facing Senator Diana DiZoglio in the September 6th Democratic primary. Chris, thank you for joining me. Welcome to Fall River. I appreciate it.
Keith, it's great to be back. Thank you.
I know you've been here a number of times. You know, one of the things in speaking to a lot of the statewide candidates is, you know, we're using this opportunity to have you introduce yourself to the Democrats of Fall River who may come out on September 6th or voting early. Unless you're from a region, people may not know who Chris Dempsey is.
Sure.
You're not from the South Coast. So give us a little overview of Chris Dempsey and why you want to be the next auditor.
Yeah, well, Keith, again, it's great to be back here. Always love coming to Fall River. And I'm the son of public school teachers. That's why I'm running for this office, because I saw my parents through the course of their career digging into their own pockets to pay for school supplies for their students. And we know public school teachers across the Commonwealth do that to this day. And that's not right. And it's the result of decisions that are made on Beacon Hill. It's the result of resources getting lost in the bureaucracy and not flowing to the places where they do the most good: public education, public transportation, public health. So I'm running for state auditor to make sure that every single dollar that we spend in state government is spent well, that it's going to the places that have the greatest difference. And we know that whether it's Fall River or communities across the South Coast or across the state, we need to be investing more in those communities. And I'm running to make sure that that happens.
What role can an auditor play other than, people think of the word auditor, it's not the flashiest of the state constitutional offices in Massachusetts, right? But it plays an important role, and we'll get into that as we speak. But in terms of, you know, finances, and an auditor can look at the books and, as you said, find ways to maybe have efficiencies and find, you know, make recommendations. But it's the legislature that appropriates, right? Based on a budget that a governor will send down. So what kind of role can an auditor play, really?
So since 2010, the auditor has been Suzanne Bump, who is the first woman to ever hold the office. She's the person who knows this job the best, and she's endorsed me to succeed her because of my track record in public service and working in the Deval-Patrick administration, amongst other roles that I've had. Her focus has really been on digging into every single one of our state agencies over the last 12 years and finding what needs to be fixed, what's broken, where she can make recommendations for improvements, whether it's efficiency or effectiveness. You're absolutely right that the auditor's role is not a direct policy-making role. You cannot wave a magic wand in this role and fix things. But what you can do is identify what's broken and then be an advocate for change within state government. You have to partner with the legislature and partner with the executive branch to make that happen. You have to do that without giving up an ounce of your independence. You have to be very firm and follow the data, but then you also have to work together. I'm so proud in this race to be endorsed by 25 women legislators, more than 40 state representatives across the state who are supporting my campaign. And as I mentioned, in the Senate, including Senate President Karen Spilka, who's endorsed my campaign. She's done that not because I'm always going to agree with her or her colleagues, but because she's looking for someone who knows that you have to follow the facts and the data, and that when that leads us to certain conclusions, can work with others on Beacon Hill to get the job done.
I want you to expound a little bit more on what you just said. You know, a lot of people think of auditor or auditing, they think of just mainly money, right?
Yeah.
But it's also practices.
That's right.
Right? And procedures within departments, which a lot of people may not understand that, you know, an audit, you'll hear of words like performance audits.
Yep.
Performance, you know, audits on how things run. Are there any, so I guess expound about that first, and then I'll get into some specifics.
Let me give you an example of some plans that I've put forward that really get to that issue. They go beyond the finances. So one is that I'm going to make the office the first in the country to incorporate carbon accounting into our audits of state agencies. And that's going to allow us to hold state agencies accountable for the laws that are on the books that require them to reduce emissions. Effectively, we're going to point out the gap between their requirements and where we actually are as a state. We know they're not doing enough. Another area that we're going to look at is reform of the Massachusetts State Police. In meeting after meeting that I've been to over the course of the last 14 months, talking to Democratic voters and really unenrolled voters as well, I've heard that the Massachusetts State Police is an area of concern. People have great respect, as I do, for our troopers on the front lines, but they want to make sure that that agency is being held accountable. There's been a series of scandals there that have kind of broken faith and trust with the public. And the auditor can step in beyond just the finances and say, are they following the law? Are they following best practices of other agencies around the country? And then again, work in partnership with those troopers to help reform that agency from within and make it more responsive to all of us.
What about the legislature? Are they, they're not adverse to being looked at as well in terms of their policies and procedures and how, obviously how they run their meetings is obviously a working of the body, but in terms of some of their practices, they're not off limits, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I've supported reforms in the legislature, including making sure that there's better access to bills before the votes occur, that there's more transparency on committee votes so that we know how people voted in committee. The auditor's ability to impact the legislature directly is somewhat limited, but I'm going to use this office to its full potential. And we'll hire a new general counsel in the office when I step in. And the first question I'm going to ask that general counsel is, can you better define exactly where you think the limits are? Let's make sure that we are going up to those limits without crossing them. I'm not running for this office to spark a constitutional crisis between the legislature and the executive branch. I'm running to roll up my sleeves and make state government work better. And I know that the existing powers of the office will allow me to do that.
And do you think you would have enough of a reputation after you get into the office and show your abilities to make the recommendations so that they're followed through? Obviously, they would need to be followed through by the legislature itself. And as we know, things that come before the legislature, they may say, well, that's a good idea, but it doesn't come into action.
Yeah. So Keith, I think it's been a hallmark of my career in public service that I've followed the data, and that when I've taken a position on something, because we're following it with facts and data or leading with facts and data, that position has been seen as credible and ultimately have been effective. And let me give you a particular example. Sure. So in 2015, some of the most powerful corporate interests in Massachusetts got together behind closed doors and they hatched a plan for the Boston 2024 Olympics.
Remember it well.
And as exciting as that idea was for many of us, when you read the fine print of that proposal, you saw that it required all of us as state taxpayers, including those of us here on the South Coast, that we would have to cover 100% of the Olympic cost overruns. So if you liked the big dig, you would love the Boston 2024 Olympics. And that didn't sit right to me. You heard that my parents were public school teachers, and I didn't like the idea that we'd be spending billions on a 3-week sporting event when our basic needs at the community level are not being met. So I created a group called No Boston Olympics in a living room. And we got outspent on that campaign, Keith, 1,500 to 1. They spent $15 million, we spent less than $10,000. And normally in politics or in government and public policy, that means you can never win when you're outspent that much.
Right.
But we had the facts and the data on our side. And we kept pounding those facts and sharing them with the public and with members of the media. And eventually everyone came around to our side and said, you know what? As fun as those 3 weeks might be, it's not worth mortgaging and risking our future as a Commonwealth to do that. And so I've proven that I'm willing to follow those facts, that I will be independent of political forces and represent what's best for all of us in the Commonwealth. And that's the kind of approach I want to bring back to the auditor's office.
I want to get a little bit more into finances. On your website, you list a number of categories that you'd like to take part in. One is the ARPA funding that the state receives, billions of dollars in money. I guess a benefit of the pandemic. It's not why we wanted to get the money here in Massachusetts, but how can the auditor make sure that even though the decisions that are being made are not made by the auditor, as other decisions are made either by the legislature or the executive branch, but how can the auditor make sure that those dollars are spent wisely on projects that are eligible to be spent on?
Yeah, Keith, it's a really great question, and this is a day one job for me, is tracking the federal stimulus dollars. We've got about $5.3 billion to spend. That money can be transformational if it's spent well. Right. Now, one of the key things with audits is that most state programs are budgeted on an annual basis. And so you can go in at the end of the year, you can perform your audit, figure out what didn't work, and you can fix it for the next year ahead. That doesn't work with one-time dollars. We don't want to spend all $5.3 billion and then audit it and realize we didn't spend the money that well. You can only spend a dollar once. And so I'm proposing to audit and track those dollars in as close to real time as possible. And that will allow us, if we find issues with how the money is being spent, to redirect those funds to places where they are going to get a bigger impact, a bigger bang for our buck. So I'm excited about that work. We've also proposed to adopt many of the recommendations of what's called the Racial Equity Scorecard, which was developed by the NAACP, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, the Mass Public Health Association, and other organizations to see if we can start to measure the impact on reducing racial inequality in Massachusetts. The pandemic exposed and reminded all of us that that gap exists. And the purpose of these dollars is to try to build a more fair and a more equitable Commonwealth, while also building one that's more economically vibrant. I think all those things go together, and that racial equity scorecard can help us use one set of metrics there to make sure we're doing the right thing.
I know one of the things that even here locally in Fall River received close to $70 million in ARPA funding, is that there appears a lot of times to be a need to say, we've got this money, how can we spend it?
Yeah.
And as time has gone on, over a year now, a year and a half, since the communities have received, a little over a year, the first ARPA funding, we're learning that patience is a virtue,
Yeah.
right? And that there are a lot of great projects that may benefit from this and not necessarily throw the money in one place. I'm sure you've seen some cities and towns spend that money right away, and I don't know if they have second thoughts or not, but is that something as well to take a step back,
Yeah.
right? There's time for the state to allocate this money, and it can be spent, 2025, 2026?
2026,
so,
I think.
Yeah, so I guess, is it wise to take a step back and be a little more patient on how this money is spent?
I think that's always a good approach when it comes to spending public resources. It's why I started that No Boston Olympics group, to say, wait a minute, before we spend $15 billion on this, let's just take a step back and check. I'm proud to be supported by Mayor Coogan in this race, just received his endorsement today in downtown Fall River. And look, I think our municipal leaders are the ones who, at the end of the day, really do the hard work of government, making sure that we're spending those dollars well. They see the potholes in the streets. They see, the parks or the schools that are not kept up to as good a repair as they would like. They know that every single dollar really counts. I am also the only candidate in this race with municipal experience. I've served as an elected town meeting member for the last 10 years. And that's not the most glamorous role ever, but it is one where you pass a municipal budget every year, and I'm proud of that work. I think cities and towns are so important, and we always want to be very careful and thoughtful about those public resources.
I want to get into a little bit now about how an auditor can impact a city like a Fall River, right? Obviously, the focus of the audit generally is, state finances, state processes. Is there a role that an auditor can play if a Mayor Coogan picks up the phone and says, hey, Chris, we have an issue with X, Y, and Z. Can the auditor help?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And let me just reiterate how much I love Fall River. The history of Fall River is unlike really any other city on the East Coast. It's a really special place that I first got to know when I was serving as policy director for Joe Kennedy III when he first ran for Congress in 2012. We got down here a lot on the course of that campaign, and I know he served this city well while he was in Congress. State and local government has to be a partnership. And again, it's why I'm proud of that local experience that I have. When Mayor Coogan calls me, and I hope that he will in this role, and I know that he will, I'm not just going to bring the relationship that I have with him, I'm going to bring the decade of experience that I have serving myself at the local level, and knowing that cities and towns often have the greatest demands on their resources and the fewest opportunities to raise revenue or change their status or their situation. So I take that work very seriously. Fall River is a proud and dynamic city. It's also a city that needs help from state programs. And we want to make sure, again, that those dollars are not getting lost in bureaucracy, that they are going to the places where there's actual need. And I absolutely look forward to being a partner to Mayor Coogan, members of the City Council, and other community members across Fall River and Greater Fall River to make sure that we're doing that.
A lot of times, and I've brought this up with just about every statewide candidate I've spoken to thus far, is a lot of times people in Fall River on the South Coast will look at Boston and say, well, they don't care about us, right? They don't care about the South Coast. But there is some movement. South Coast Rail's coming next year, end of next year, right? After a long period. I remember when Governor Weld made the promise in 1990 to bring South Coast Rail here. So I guess the question for you as a statewide auditor is, you mentioned it, but maybe if you can expand upon it, is how can an auditor benefit different regions of the state? Yeah. You'll hear the same, concerns from Western Mass, right? Well, they don't care about me. They're in Boston. They don't care about Western Mass.
Sure. Well, first thing I would say is that voters who are considering their choice in this race should look at the local leaders who have endorsed me. We talked already about Mayor Coogan. I'm proud to be endorsed by State Rep Carol Faiola and Rep Pat Haddad, both of whom are strongly endorsing and supporting my candidacy and who have deep and longstanding ties on the South Coast. But I also think it's important to remember that this is one of just 6 statewide elected positions, right? Just 6. It has a responsibility to truly represent every voter, every resident, every taxpayer across the state. It's one of the very few roles in state government that does that. And I'm proud of the campaign that we have built statewide, from Pittsfield to Provincetown, from Fall River to Newburyport. We have built a grassroots team that has folks from all of those communities and more who are supporting my candidacy. Over the course of this campaign, we have raised individual contributions from over 2,200 individual contributors, by far the most in the race. So we have that grassroots energy. We have the support of so many folks who are engaged at the local level. I've come down to the South Coast a number of times over the course of the campaign, and I look forward to coming back time and time again, hopefully in the general election,
right.
And then especially when I'm auditor, to learn about what people want to see changed in state government.
Now, an issue that has cropped up more recently than in the past is the issue of the MBTA. We talk about South Coast Rail coming to Fall River. That's going to be a shiny new station. There's a lot of other problems, obviously, with the MBTA.
Yeah.
How can the auditor work with, say, Attorney General, legislature, executive branch, to do a deep dive into the MBTA when you're elected?
Keith, this is an issue that's deeply personal to me. My wife, Anna, goes to work on the T every day. And I will be the first statewide elected official to commute to Beacon Hill by the MBTA in over 30 years, since Mike Dukakis left office in 1991. This is the first time in my lifetime of riding the T that I have genuinely questioned my safety when getting on an MBTA vehicle because of the series of safety issues that have existed at the MBTA. So I want to see that agency fixed. I want to be a partner to fixing that agency. And we've put out a 4-point plan that guides point by point, step by step, how the auditor's office can help. Again, we can't wave a magic wand and fix that agency. Nobody can. It's taken decades to put it in the position that it's in. It's going to take decades to get it out, to make it a world-class transit agency that it should be. But I am deeply, deeply committed to public transportation. I'm delighted that the MBTA will be coming back to the South Coast in the years ahead. And I know everyone here has been waiting for that service. They want to see that service work well when it's finally up and running. I want to be the partner and that ally in that work.
Another item on your website of interest to you is reproductive rights. Supreme Court, we all know, in June voted to overturn Roe versus Wade. Massachusetts has a very strong abortion, women's rights laws on the books. How can, as auditor, you play a role in that? Again, people think, abortion rights, auditor, you think, again, the processes, the finances.
Yeah. Well, this is another issue, Keith, that is personal to me. I was in elementary school when an anti-choice terrorist attacked abortion clinics in my hometown. One of those shootings was less than a mile from my house. And I remember talking to my parents as a middle schooler, basically, and asking them what was happening and having them tell me about the importance of protecting women who are accessing basic health care. So, that seems like the distant past, but it's really not that distant in the long scope of history. As auditor, there's a couple of things that I can do. So one is to make sure that we are not using state dollars to fund what are called fake clinics, which are offices that purport to be healthcare facilities, but in fact don't offer basic healthcare services, and try to deceive women into a false set of choices or options that they might have ahead of them. We want to make sure that the state is not supporting those fake clinics and that they're only going to actual genuine healthcare. But I think more broadly, I get back to this point about being one of 6 statewide elected officials. It's important and incumbent upon all 6 of those statewide elected officials to be champions for reproductive equity, and maybe especially if they're men like me. This is not an issue that we can leave just to women to fight about. Men have to be upfront as strong allies, and I want to be that ally. I will be that ally. I've been that ally through the course of my career in public life, and there's a contrast in this race when it comes to that. And I want to continue that work as the next state auditor.
So let me ask you, we're just about ready to wrap up in a few moments. Your challenger, State Senator Diana DiZoglio, I had the opportunity to speak with her, and I asked her the same question I'm going to ask you. For voters out there, how do you differentiate yourself from her in the primary? Because a lot of times in the primary, a lot of times, not always, candidates tend to have, in general, Democrats or Republicans, see eye to eye on many issues. But how do you differentiate yourself from the senator in this primary race?
Sure. I'm the only candidate in this race with experience working in the executive branch of state government, which is the focus of the job, is fixing the executive branch. That's why, in part, that incumbent state auditor, Suzanne Bump, the first woman to ever hold the office, has endorsed me in this race. I'm also the only candidate with a degree relevant to the job of auditing. I have an MBA, and I think there's a real contrast there in terms of training in accounting and finance. I would also then point to the endorsements that I've received from really incredible leaders across the state. People like Mayor Michelle Wu in Boston. We already mentioned Mayor Coogan here in Fall River. Just last week, I was endorsed by the Boston Globe. But then especially the endorsements from legislators and especially women in the legislature. One way to think about that is that the people who have worked with my opponent in this race, side by side in the legislature, those women who have been in the trenches of fighting for a more fair Commonwealth and fighting for issue after issue that we care about, are endorsing me in this race and not their colleague. I think that is a reason for people to think about who they would be electing in this role. I'm really proud to have the support again of people like State Rep Carol Fayola, and I think there's a lot to that story about why those legislators and especially those women legislators have decided to support me in this race.
We have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak to the voters of Fall River, the Democrats who may be coming out on September 6th, and why they should consider Chris Dempsey as the next auditor.
Thanks so much for having me today. I'm Chris Dempsey. I'm running to be your next state auditor. I'm the son of public school teachers. My parents met while teaching in the Boston public schools, and I saw them through the course of their career digging into their own pockets to pay for school supplies for their students, as we know public school teachers do to this day across the Commonwealth. I've served in the public sector working for Governor Deval Patrick as Assistant Secretary of Transportation. I'm the only candidate in this race with experience working in the executive branch, which is the focus of the job. But I've also worked outside of state government to stand up to protect the public interest as the co-founder of the grassroots group No Boston Olympics, which saved taxpayers $15 billion from Olympic cost overruns. As auditor, I'll make the office a national leader on issues like climate change, and we'll tackle tough issues like reform of the Massachusetts State Police. I'm proud to be endorsed in this race by incumbent state auditor Suzanne Bump, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, Fall River Mayor Coogan, the Boston Globe, and over 25 women legislators in the Senate and in the House who have endorsed my campaign. And I'll just close with this. I live in the first floor of a triple-decker with my amazing wife Anna, about 2.5 blocks from where I grew up and where my public school teacher parents still live. Anna and I are looking forward to starting a family together. We want that to be in a Massachusetts that is the best that it can be. And that means making Massachusetts state government the best that it can be by making it more transparent, more accountable, more efficient, and more fair. That's why I'm running to be your next state auditor. I'd be honored to have your vote on September 6th. Again, I'm Chris Dempsey, candidate for state auditor. Thank you.
Chris Dempsey, thank you for joining us. And when you're successful in September, we hope to get you back again between now and the November election. Do this again and talk about that race.
We'd love to be back.
All right.
Thanks so much, Keith.
I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us here on FRC Media. And please make a point to vote on Tuesday, September 6th.